One of the conversations I have all the time with my private students is the 4 phases of development that you're going to go through as a musician and as a student of music. And the real key to musical growth is getting your mindset right and being able to frame music education in a way that will be beneficial to you. So let's get started. Every musician begins their journey as just a music fan or just a listener, right? You hear a piece of music that resonates with you and connects with you emotionally, and you say, wow, I really want to do that, okay? Everybody starts off not knowing anything about how music works, okay? Essentially, you hear a great piece of music or a great musician, and you don't know how they're creating those sounds. All you know, essentially, is that you like what you hear, okay? This first stage is what I like to call unconscious incompetence, okay? At this point in your development, you don't have any clue as how musical sounds are created, and it's very easy to make an incorrect assumption at this phase when you're first starting out. When you see a great player who is playing effortlessly and it looks simple, you make the assumption of, yeah, I could probably do that. That doesn't look that hard, okay? The danger of this initial phase is that a lot of people fall victim to what's called the Kruger effect, which, if you don't know what that is, it's a cognitive bias that essentially can be summed up as people with little knowledge about a subject or an area of study tend to overestimate their own ability within the context of that subject because they don't have an awareness of what they don't know. Okay, in other words, the skill set that is required when you're first starting out to make an accurate assessment of your own ability is exactly the skill set that you are lacking, okay? Here's a couple of interesting diagrams about how Dunning-Kruger works, okay? So we have confidence, and then knowledge, okay? Somebody who's just starting off can be falsely confident about their ability because they haven't been exposed to enough actual learning to realize how much is involved, okay? So what ends up happening after you start to learn, boy, your confidence drops, okay? And after a while, as you build knowledge, your confidence will come back up. The interesting thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect is that even people who are experts in their field still aren't as confident as the unknowing beginner, because a true expert realizes that the learning process is never ending, right? You're always going to be exposed to new ideas, and you'll always be able to pursue something else to get even better. Here's another interesting one. I really like this one. Okay, so we have competence on the bottom, and then we have confidence on the side. Okay, here is the peak of Mount Stupid. Okay, this is when you don't even really know what you've gotten yourself into. And the more you learn about, especially as a musician, the more you learn about exactly what makes music work, you start to drop down into the valley of despair. Okay, this is where a lot of people just stop playing because they get frustrated and they quit, and they don't realize that you have to kind of fight through that. Okay, you have to get comfortable with doing the boring work that's going to make you a better player, and that's where you start to really build up not only your abilities but your confidence in playing. Okay, here's one more. Okay, you start off saying, what's this? I don't even know what I'm doing. And then you might falsely assume that, you learn a couple chords and you can play a few songs. They say, oh yeah, I know it all. And then you really want to get better. And if you take it seriously, you start to realize, boy, I don't really know that much at all. Okay, once again, you got to fight through that urge to just abandon things. And you have to really stick to it to be able to actually grow as a musician. There's a great quote by Albert Einstein where he said, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And if that's good enough for Einstein, that's good enough for me, okay? So if you do stick with it, okay, and you start to really, pursue the study of musical craft, you get to the second phase, which I like to call conscious incompetence, okay? You start studying, the core building blocks of musical behavior, and you start to realize how much there is to learn. The hardest part about phase 2 is that you have to essentially painfully admit that you are musically incompetent, okay? Through my own personal journey as a lifelong student of music, there were many times where I actually felt like I was actually getting worse or regressing in my playing, even if I had been practicing a lot. It felt like all of a sudden I'm making all of these mistakes and stuff I was playing was not very musical sounding, okay? What was really happening, and what I didn't realize at the time, is that my ears were getting better as I practiced, okay? I was hearing with more accuracy. my time feel and my rhythm was getting better. I was playing with better groove, and my overall knowledge of how music worked was increasing. So the reality of the situation at the time that I didn't realize was that all of those mistakes that I was making, and that kind of lack of musicality that was bothering me, that stuff had been there all along. But what had happened is that I had gradually progressed to a point where I was good enough to realize that I was making those mistakes. All right. In other words, I didn't have earlier in my, development, I didn't have the level of proficiency that was required to even notice that I was making mistakes. Okay. I will say once again from experience, this second phase is brutal, and it will test your resolve and your patience and your dedication to the craft. But you got to fight through that. Once again, you got to get used to doing the boring work. That's how you're going to get better. And a lot of times the satisfaction and reward in this phase isn't the same as when you first start. Okay, when you first start, if you learn a couple chords and you learn to strum and you learn a couple songs, you're like, oh, this is great, and the satisfaction level is high. But if you really want to become a serious player and you really want to, pursue this more in depth, there are going to be moments that are kind of discouraging. But once again, you got to push through that stuff. This is where you get to phase 3. Okay, phase 3 is conscious competence. Okay, this is where you can actually start to do things musically. Okay, now you still have to think about it, and a lot of times you really have to focus and kind of walk yourself through a couple of steps of how to actually get a certain sound, but you can at least play at this point. Okay, you haven't got everything ironed out and nothing's on autopilot necessarily, but you've learned to apply new knowledge and new skills in a musical way. Okay, and this is where once again your confidence starts to come back and you start to feel better about your abilities. Most people I teach, this is where they tend to spend most of their musical development is in this third phase, where they've pushed through that initial kind of depressing part about, boy, this is really tough, okay? And they've dedicated themselves to developing their skills, okay? The one observation I've made about being in this phase for decades is that most amazing music is just a handful of basic ideas. It's rhythm and melody and harmony. But you have to be able to perform and execute those ideas on a really high level. So everybody that I teach, I try to remind them that you need to practice the fundamentals of music behavior way longer than you think you do. Okay, it's not just about understanding how music works. It's about internalizing this stuff so that it does become automatic. And if you do this long enough, eventually you get to phase 4. Okay, phase 4 is unconscious competence. Okay, this is where the real magic happens at this stage. Okay, at this point in your musical journey, you can pretty much do anything that you imagine. Okay, you can play in any musical situation or in any genre with any group of players, and you can do it without hesitation, and you don't even have to think about it. Okay, it's the idea of kind of just knowingness. All right, you find yourself in a musical situation, and because you've done the work, nothing is going to catch you off guard. Okay, at this point in your development, this is, it's just part of who you are. Music is in your DNA. Okay, and at this kind of level of mastery, which is what we're all eventually aiming for, everything you do just comes out right. Everything's on autopilot and things just happen naturally and organically. And you don't have any fear or anxiety or stress. You just know how to do things, and you don't really have to consciously think about it. Over the decades of my own, journey with becoming a better player, I've had a couple fleeting moments that are kind of in this level where it really feels like an out-of-body experience, like the music is just happening and it's just coming out. Okay, there's a handful of amazing musicians who reach this phase, and this goes back to what I was saying about when you first start off. You're a music fan. You're just a listener. You hear a great musician and it resonates with you and you say, I want to do that. And because they make it look so effortless, because they've put in the work, once again, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, oh yeah, I could do that, no problem. But once again, the harsh reality is you have to put in the time, okay? I found that, as far as my perspective on this, the handful of musicians who reach this phase, they're not just masters of their craft, but I like to think of them as kind of like musical ambassadors for the world, okay? They're like musical preachers, and they spread the word to everyone who will listen that, music really is joy and it should be shared with everybody. I don't consider myself a religious person, but I would certainly say that I've had, spiritual experiences listening to amazing musicians. When I hear somebody like Jeff Beck or I listen to Stevie Wonder, or I listen to Miles Davis or Herbie Hancock. These are guys that are at a level where the music just flows out of them. What we don't see is the thousands of hours that they had to put into that, okay? So once again, start off, you don't really know anything. Then you start to play a little bit and you kind of get humbled about, wow, this is a lot trickier than I thought. But once again, if you fight through that stuff and you really have a good practice routine and regimen, you gradually start to build your knowledge and your confidence. And if you stick with it, eventually you get to that point where music just kind of happens. I think this could probably best be summed up by what Frank Zappa said, where Zappa said, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom, and wisdom is not truth, and truth is not beauty, and beauty is not love, and love is not music, because music is the best. And I agree with Frank on that. If you have a question or a comment, leave it below. Don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to this channel. I'll see you next time.